sound.
You sound beautiful. Welcome to the Good Mood Show. I'm your host, Matt O'Neill. Be sure to hit subscribe so you get a good mood every single week. Today, we're talking with Bryan Yates, who is described as a personal trainer for your inner fitness. Bryan provides performance and leadership coaching for middle-aged leaders who want to change their game and prepare for their next act. He's worked with Holocaust survivors as an oral historian. He's been a digital media producer for the Walt Disney Company. He's owned multiple businesses, including a boutique fitness studio, or multiple boutique fitness studios in Los Angeles, California. He's also a recovering alcoholic, an achievement culture addict, and a semi-competitive endurance cyclist. Bryan's coaching program is called Clarity, Velocity, and Grace. It combines principles of sports psychology, business strategy, endurance sports performance, and personal development, and it's designed for both women and men who want to change how they perform. Bryan's goal is to be of impactful service, one conversation at a time. We're all very fortunate to be having this conversation with such a wonderful man. Bryan, welcome to the Good Mood Show.
Thank you for having me on, Matt. I think you said it better than I could have said it. So I was like, wow, who is that guy? I want to talk to him. So
yeah, me too.
The introduction.
Me too. And Bryan, you are finishing your inner fitness toolkit for busy professionals. So hopefully by the time this show is live, that will be something we can send out to our Good Mood Show newsletter. And if not, then maybe one day in the future, we'll have you back and we'll send it out.
Let's be honest. I'm actually maybe considering getting it started. I am a procrastinator, and I can imagine that there are one or two listeners out there who will join me in avoidance and procrastination. So come on, let's go. So I keep thinking about what's going to go in that thing, and my intern keeps saying, "Hey, when are you going to do that thing?" And I'm like, there's a big shrug.
Well, you have until September 25th.
Okay. All right.
So
thank you for
let's do it. That is a deadline. That's one of the keys to procrastination. You need a hard deadline.
And I need an accountability buddy, and you just signed up, Matt. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you're the coach, and the story I was really excited to hear was about the athlete you were coaching at the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. Take us back to that time. What was going on?
That was a phenomenal experience. For those of you that don't know, Leadville 100 is one of the most iconic and brutal mountain bike races around. It attracts 4,000, 5,000 people each year, and you got to qualify to get in. And at the time, I was doing a lot more cycling coaching for executive level, management level athletes. People will get to this point in their life in their late 30s or 40s, and they start popping their head up and they go, I got to achieve something. I got to do something different because work isn't doing it for me. So I better go find connection somewhere else. And I had an athlete who had really changed their life a lot. And I'm going to use the they in this instance, just to protect their anonymity. But they'd gone through a lot to change their life. They had, in their 20s, they'd done what a lot of us did, and they got a little bit doughy physically and got a little bit lethargic and a little bit focused on other things. And they wanted to accomplish something, and they wanted to do something big. And, they wanted to do it on the bike. And so they chose Leadville 100 as an event that they were targeting. And we did it, right? We got them in, and it was really fantastic to see that they could do that. And so it's the morning of, and the event happens in August. It's the morning of, and it's dark. And Leadville, everything about what makes Leadville so tough is that it's 100 miles on a mountain bike, and all of it happens above 10,000 feet. So the air is really thin up there, and it's really hard to breathe. And there's just this monstrous climb. So we're there in the morning of, it's dark, people are lined up at the chute at their starting line. And we're talking to the athlete, and their partner is there. And we're talking and just like, calming, keeping them calm, keeping them focused. And one of the things you got to do Like when you start, the higher up in elevation you go, the more you have to adjust your performance expectations. And so this particular athlete had a tendency to be a great first quarter rider, and then they would peter out because they'd cash in a lot of their chips in the first quarter of the ride. And I had to convince them, like, go slower than you want, go slower than you want, go slower than you want, go slower. And you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go slower than I want, which is never gonna happen. Not for a first time Leadville rider, right? And the thing about Leadville is that if you finish under 9 hours, you're in pretty rare company, and you get this beautiful belt buckle. Beautiful belt buckle. I'm like, I want the belt buckle. So great, that's fantastic. I'm glad you're striving for that. It's going to be a challenge for a first year mountain biker, first year Leadville competitor to get that, but let's go for it. So they take off, all the riders take off, the partner and I go off down maybe 30 miles down the road or so. We set up a little aid station for them, and the rider comes barreling in, and they're super jazzed, and they're really going for it. And what happens is that you go up this huge climb, and then you come back down the same climb, and it's this kind of goat trail descent. And the descent actually takes as much work as the climb itself, right? A lot of us tend to think descending is easy, and it is. It takes a whole other kind of mental energy, right? If you're constantly afraid you're going to fall off a mountain, then you're spending energy, right? And everything about endurance cycling or any endurance sport is about energy management and efficiency. So they go up and they come back down, and they come back down, and they hit our aid station, and they just tear into like a bag of chips, just rip it open. It's like, uh-oh, this is not a good look. This is desperation eating right here. And they take off. Partner and I figure we'll go back to another point on the course. We'll stop in Leadville first, go back to another point of the course where we can see the rider. So this person, the rider, as we're getting back into Leadville, the rider calls and sends a text like, come and get me. I'm at an aid station. I'm at the medic station. Come get me. And I'm like, oh no, they trained so hard to get here. And as a coach, I'm sitting there thinking, did they crash? Is something broken? Is their bike destroyed? What's going on? And I said, what's going on? I said, well, I got this horrible cramp and I can't get any power out of my leg, out of my right leg. So you can get power out of your left leg, right? Yeah, great. Go, get on your bike and go. Just go. But it hurts. I said, of course it hurts. Go. And you have to, as a coach, there's also another responsibility in there, right? I have to listen. Go, am I sending this person into something am I going to get them into trouble that they can't get out of? Like, go, we'll meet you. So we met the rider on the road, on the dirt, after they'd left the aid station. I knew if they spent too long in the aid station as well, they're going to get their number pulled. They're going to get disqualified. And I think the pain of getting disqualified is going to be a lot worse than the pain they're feeling in that leg.
Sure.
So I'll kind of hustle through this a little bit, but then, so what happens is they get on and we pull up in the car, and we're driving next to the rider, and they're clearly disappointed in themselves that they've called us. They're like, I can't believe I did. I was like, just go. We're going to follow you to the next spot where we can't follow you anymore. Like, please stop following. We're like, no, we're getting you to the next spot. Just go, go, go. So we get to the next spot where we can't go anymore. And the rider takes off, and partner and I go to another part of the course, and we have a tracker on our phone, like we're tracking all the athletes, and we're sitting there waiting at this next spot, waiting. Riders are going by, and people I knew from Los Angeles were going by, and my rider never shows up. Oh my God, did they get pulled off the course? There we go. I just gave it up. All right. So he got pulled off the course. I'm terrible at anonymity. So we go back to Leadville, and I'm freaked out. I'm absolutely freaked out at the finish line. And I'm going up to the officials. Where's my rider? Where's my rider? We don't know. But we'll sweep them up. It'll be fine. Like, where's my rider? And just as I'm about to get back in the car and just and ride the course in reverse to find the rider, I hear their name called. So relieved. I'm just like on the verge of tears, just so relieved to hear their name. And I go up to the finish line, and he stumbled across the finish line. And I don't know if anyone has seen Lawrence of Arabia. You remember there's the scene where like right before intermission, the Lawrence has gone off into the Devil's Anvil, the hottest part of the Negev desert or whatever, and he comes back out with the two kids he saved, and he just looks like he's just caked in dirt. Well, this is what my rider looks like, just caked in dirt, and he's talking like this. And Lawrence at that point says, "Nothing is written," and my rider comes through, and he hugs his wife, and then he hugs me. He's like, "Thank you for not letting me quit." And it's like this moment out of Lawrence of Arabia. It's really, from a coaching standpoint, it's a profound moment because they didn't have the ride. He didn't have the ride he wanted. Didn't have the ride he planned for, but you got to plan for the worst. But we also weren't going to let him give up on himself. And there he goes. He got to have that experience of finishing one of the most notorious mountain bike races around. So that is the story.
100 miles, right? 100-mile ride up and down mountains in Colorado at 10,000.
On a mountain bike.
Yeah, crazy in like mountain bike trails, right? So this isn't a dirt, or this isn't a paved road with road bikes on 100 miles. This is like ridiculously hard mountain biking in the mountains of Colorado.
Yep. Some of it's on goat trail, some of it's on dirt like forest road, and some of it's just on these gnarly climbs.
I used to live out there in Denver, and I loved to mountain bike. But the longest trails we would ride would be 25 or 30 miles. And I was dogged, man. Like I would get done with that and be like, whoo, that's a day. and
I'm ready for a snack and a nap.
Yeah, absolutely. And a shower, right?
And a nap, for sure.
Yeah.
And recovery for the next 3 days.
And this story has me think of a quote you had sent me, which is, hard moments force us to make hard decisions about who we want to be.
Yeah, I think, we're constantly in this process of becoming. And this is something that's kind of come to me more recently. Like, at the point I am in my life, I spent my 20s, 30s, and 40s of like, who am I? Who am I being? And then someone asked me the question once, like, who are you becoming? I'm like, oh, there we go. That's a much harder question to answer, but it's a much better question than who are you? And I think in those instances, we're always in this process of becoming, but in those hard moments like that, where it's like, do I stop? Do I let the rider stop and go forward? Or do I say, no, you're going to be a different person at the end of this, and let's figure out who that person is. Let's give that person a chance to exist. And if we stop now, we're not giving that person a chance to show up. So let's do that.
I love that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of David Goggins, and he's had an inspiration on me. Another guy that had an inspiration on me with this regards to not quitting was Darren Hardy.
I know Darren.
Darren wrote a book called The Compound Effect.
Okay.
And in that book, he said, once you've committed and you've promised yourself you're going to do something, you have to do it.
You have to do it.
Because as soon as you let the weakness and you win, you've now just weakened your muscle the next time you tell yourself you're going to do something. You'll believe yourself less next time. So if that person you had been coaching, who said, hey, I'm gonna finish this 100-mile race, if you had let him quit, the next time he set a big goal, whether it be in work or sports or whatever, he's less likely to believe himself that he's actually going to follow through. And that always stuck with me. And Darren said, he's like, if you tell yourself you're going to wake up tomorrow morning and run 3 miles on the treadmill, you better get up and go run 3 miles on the treadmill, not 2.5. Because every single commitment you make to yourself is a commitment. And whether you follow through or not is how strong your muscle of commitment is getting. And there's mornings I would wake up and like feel sick, like, oh, I got a cold, or I'd sleep really bad, or I'd get 2.5 miles in the treadmill and just be like, I'm just not feeling it. But that always resonated in my mind of, if I told myself I was going to do it, stick it out, because I'm becoming a person who honors my commitments to myself. And it served me really well.
I think that that's really valuable, but I also think that in the grace part of my program is that we also have to give ourselves a bit of space that sometimes we're not going to have it, right? And I've been in I'm far less of the competitive. In fact, I'm not a competitive cyclist at all anymore. And I do think that there are times where it's okay to just say, you know what, I'm throwing good time after bad at the moment. I'm throwing good money after bad, right? And I might be better off if I just sit back and give myself the space to just chill out and just be, right? And we can make that part of our process. It's funny, like I said, and I don't want people to think that I still do a lot of coaching on the physical side. I mean, a lot of what I do is really about mental performance coaching, but I've coached hundreds of cyclists, endurance athletes, and I was just thinking about this the other day and wrote something on it the other day, and that there's two parts of an interval, right? When you do interval training, there's two parts. There's the on part where you're doing high intensity work, and then there's the off part, and you turn off the intensity. And one of the things that happens for a lot of less mature athletes is that they don't turn off. They don't give themselves a space to turn off. And the reason they don't turn off is because, they start worrying that their friends are going to go out and get the PR, that their friends are going to go out and get stronger than they are. And this is true of general fitness enthusiasts as well. I'd see it in when I was coaching indoor cycling classes, like I'd say, turn it off. And people would keep going. And what they were doing was calorie hunting. And if you're calorie hunting, you're coming from a place of fear, because you're afraid that you're not burning all the calories that you need to be burning for whatever reason, right? Whether it's to fit in some form of clothing or to justify that indulgence, whatever, but that comes from a place of fear. And the reality is, from a sports science standpoint, turning it off is where adaptation and growth happens, right? We do the overload in the work, and the growth happens in the rest and recovery. So that you have to have an off part. It is the yang to the yin, right? It is like you must have that other part for it to work. Otherwise, we just flatten out and we keep hitting a ceiling. So so I agree with you. Yeah, commit, right? That's if that's the muscle you want to train, the spiritual muscle we want to train is that we train that commitment, but also recognize, like, there are going to be times where it's just not the right thing to do.
Yeah. And you had said that your sobriety and recovery process had really been a journey of greater self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're leaning into right here. Can you describe this self-acceptance that you've learned to have now?
Yeah, I think, today I actually, more than calling myself recovering alcoholic, I call it more of I'm an alcoholic in recovery, which means it's an ongoing process for me that starts fresh every 24 hours, right? Because I got one day at a time, and sometimes I got 1 hour at a time, right? And I have to be very conscious of that. And that journey of self-acceptance is that I think that a lot of us negotiate away our self-acceptance, right? We make it very negotiable. And what I mean by that is that we tell ourselves unconsciously, I'll accept myself when I get that new job. I'll accept myself when I get that new promotion. When I finish that marathon, I'm going to accept myself. When I win that marathon, I'm going to accept. And we just keep raising the stakes on ourselves. And this is such a common thing for people in their late 20s and 30s and early 40s. And even
This reminds me of calorie hunting too. I'll accept myself when I'm that weight. But until then, I don't approve of myself. I don't approve of the way I look. I don't accept myself.
And I don't accept myself. And so from a sobriety standpoint, like rule one, surrender. Rule two, accept that I am powerless over alcohol. And with that, I also have to accept that I'm completely powerless over other people, and I'm powerless over my own emotions. And when I can start to really accept that and accept the ways that I've run away from myself in the past, then my only next option is to start taking 100% accountability and responsibility for my actions and for my responses. But it has to come from that acceptance first, right? Like if I'm just not in a great physical place, I have to say that this is where I am today, and I have to be fully comfortable with it. And only then can I start to really make the changes that I want to make. But if I'm not making it from a place of self-acceptance, then I'm making it from a place of fear, right? And I'd rather own all of the choices up and down that chain, and all of the intentions and motivations up and down that chain.
One of the quotes that you and I love together is this quote of how we do one thing in our life is pretty much how we do most things in our life.
Yeah.
How do you use this lesson when you're coaching people?
How do I not use it, I think? And how do I not? And I use it on myself all the time. And I don't, where did that quote come from? Is it Joe Dispenza?
I heard it from Tony Robbins, and he could have gotten it from Joe Dispenza.
I stole it from my friend Julie Vanarelli, who's a physical therapist and comedian. And we were doing a group once, and she threw it out. I was like, wow. And she sees it all the time in people who, will continue to exercise or train hard on top of injuries rather than allowing the injury to recover, right? And I think this, I spent a fair bit of time at one part of my career doing personal training, and you can see this in people. If you're calorie hunting in one area of your life, you're calorie hunting in another area of your life, right? That's a great way to look at this, right? If you're saying, I'm going to do this to get my self-acceptance, then where else? Then we're doing it in other places. If I'm avoidant, if I'm being avoidant on a decision, if I'm being avoidant on some area of my relationship, then I'm probably being avoidant in other areas. And for me, from a coaching standpoint, one of the things that, from a physical coaching standpoint, overworked muscles don't get stronger. They break. And yet people want to overwork their muscles all the time. We overwork our grasping. We overwork the impression that we're trying to put out in the world. We overwork our need to control things. And so, from a coaching standpoint, I'm often looking for what is the most muscle, spiritual, emotional muscle, mental muscle that someone is overworking, and how do we shift that energy somewhere else? And how do we give someone the permission? How do I give someone the permission that they're refusing to give themselves to try a different path?
We could use this quote in a positive light too.
Sure.
If I'm peaceful and joyful in one area of my life, I could bring that peace and joy to other areas of my life.
Absolutely. That's right. I think that's absolutely right.
It's why I started a meditation practice in the morning, even though I didn't really see the need for it. It kind of felt like a waste of time when I started.
Let's go into that.
And yeah, right. Because I'm the type of the guy you're talking about, the overworker, right? I've never had an injury I can't work through. It's like my mentality. Like, oh, we'll just work it harder. It'll get better through work.
Now, how old are you?
42.
42. Okay. All right. Wait for it.
And so I started this meditation practice, and just starting my morning with a mindset of peace and calm and releasing all worry and anxiety. It's like, if I can do that there, well, how I do one thing is how I do everything. So I can take that same peace and joy and just calm and ease mentality into my work that day.
I love that meditation practice. I've been doing, my meditation practice can be really hit or miss. And it's funny when I start talking with new potential people that I'm going to coach, I think they come at it with the assumption that somehow I've figured it all out and that somehow I've got all the answers. Like, no, the reason we're talking is because you might be interested in coming on my journey, and I'm a work in progress.
Yeah.
And my meditation practice, like a lot of things in my life, can be messy, which, by the way, going back to your self-acceptance question, there you go, right? I'm willing to let things be messier these days. I don't need to have things perfect going out the door. They don't need to look a certain way. They just need to look the way that they're supposed to in that moment where we are now. So, my meditation practice, sometimes it's 20 minutes and sometimes it's 3 minutes of just focused breath work. It just depends on where I'm at. But I'm totally on board with you. Like, if I can train that first thing in the morning, then anything that comes up that might want to throw me off of my spiritual balance, my emotional balance, that's home base. I can go back to that breathing and say, oh, wait, here I am. I'm present. I'm back in the moment. Am I alive? Do I have a roof over my head? Is there a paycheck? Does my wife still love me? Sweet. Great.
Life is good. Check, check,
Okay.
check, check. Life is awesome.
Next.
Next. Yeah, that's one of your exercises you were talking about. This you coach a process called over next. Can you
Yeah.
take us through that?
Yeah, this is great. I actually stole this from Norman Lear. You know who Norman Lear is?
I don't know.
Norman Lear was one of the, well, he's still alive. I mean, he's like one of the famous American television producers from like the 70s, All in the Family, the Jeffersons, all of these shows in the 70s that were groundbreaking and changing television. He, this is great. Like, I don't know, 7 years ago, maybe at the age of 94, he was out book touring a new memoir. Right. Okay, so let's just pause on that for a moment. The dude's 94 and out on a book tour.
That is awesome. I hope I go outside of my house. I hope I'm still alive at 94. But then if I'm 94 and actually leave my house or whatever home I'm in, that is a win. But he just wrote a new memoir. Oh, that is awesome. What a legend.
Legend, like of the Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks crew, right? Like he came up with that whole crew. And so I heard this interview with him on NPR, and the journalist, the interviewer asked him, Mr. Lear, what do you attribute your professional and creative longevity to? And he took this very thoughtful pause and he leaned into the mic and he said, knowing the meaning of two words, over and next. And for me, it was like, oh, that's so great. That's so great, right? Because on the one hand, on over, it's like, I'm letting go of this thing. Next, let's hit the next thing. And so over and next is really a simple thing. I've got people I coach who are going to just cringe when I say this. But I like to work in columns, right? I like to put columns together, and the exercise is super simple. In the left column is over, and on the right column is next. And when I find things that aren't serving me anymore, I write over. And when I try to find the replacement thing, next. And I write it in, and I just can visually look at it. And for me, on a very simple way, the act of writing is taking it from my head to my heart to the physical. And so it's like, I'm done with this. And the reality is we're all human and we all have character, ego defenses. All of us, right? We pick up our resentments all the time. We pick up those old muscles, right? Going back to the how we do one thing is how we do many things. We go back to that old thing that isn't serving us anymore. And so I have to go back to that writing process of saying, oh, no, I said I was going to be over with that, next. And I'm human and I have to keep reworking that process.
I love this. I love putting it on paper with just 2 columns, over something that's not serving me anymore, and next what I'm going to replace it with. Do you do this with your clients with something they want to replace? Like they're saying, hey, Perhaps smoking cigarettes is no longer serving me. I want it to be over. And then here's the next. Or is it only things they've already decided are over?
No, I think it's I think my process is I'm doing a lot more talking today than I would typically in a session. I tend to do more asking
Right.
and curiosity. Here's a great example. There was a period in my life where I was constantly telling, and saying, telling, announcing, pronouncing, right? And this is kind of it's a closed way of communicating.
Mhm.
And it's not always conducive to creating a great deal of collaboration. And collaboration, as I've gotten older, is way better than competition for me. Collaboration goes way further. And I think I think you're in the real estate business, right? You do a lot of question asking to
Yes.
help people find what the property is. And so for me, the over was telling, and the next was curiosity. And so on a practical level, how do I convert that into a skill? Well, the next, how do I incorporate that into my operating system and playbook? And I said, if telling is closed off and I want to keep things open and expansive, then I got to be curious. And how am I going to be curious? Then I have to pause in conversations and look, how am I going to become aware of what it is I'm about to say? And then I get to make the decision in that moment. Am I going to make a pronouncement and say, you do this? Or am I going to take another approach and ask a question that opens up curiosity and maybe takes us down another path? So in a very practical way, that's how I might apply that on myself. Or I may say, yeah, I don't like how I am when I'm in a really competitive space, or when I'm really competitive with myself when I'm cycling, because then I start to get judgmental. And if I'm getting judgmental, I'm out of self-acceptance. So if I'm going to replace competitive, if I want to be over with that, then how do I get collaborative? How do I get cooperative? And I put that in the next column, and I start looking for tactics for cooperation.
Man, I love both of those examples. This over is telling and explaining, and my way.
Mansplaining and all of it.
Right. And next is curious and question asking and being open. And the one way of telling is all about how smart I am, and you need to know it.
You need to know it. That's impression management, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the next part, the curious open part, is how smart you are, how smart we are together. And how 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it can equal 10 sometimes if we really collaborate. And I love this competitive versus cooperative. I play basketball just for fun in the mornings. And I was just having this conversation with myself last week. I got really competitive in a game. And all the guys I play with are my buddies, but I was getting hit, and I didn't like that. And then we were losing, and I didn't like that. So I ratcheted up the intensity, and I started to deliver some hits. And all of a sudden, they weren't my buddies anymore. And we ended up winning the games that day, and I felt awful.
At what cost?
At what cost, right?
Well, there's a spiritual cost in there.
At the cost of my peace and my joy and my friendships and my values. And so replacing that competitiveness, the next day I went to play, my prayer was, I was praying and I said, God, help me be joyful with all players on my team and the other team. So that if that's the energy I'm bringing to basketball today, then it's a win. We ended up losing. I played well. Our team played well. We got beat, right? I felt awesome. The whole day, the winning didn't matter. It was really, was I cooperative with who I was playing with, instead of in this competitive energy that wasn't really serving my highest good or their highest good.
Yeah, I think, I think that that's great, right? Maybe you found yourself passing the ball in creative ways,
I
and
did. Yeah, it was fun.
taking the shot, but I'm going to do the magic pass, and the magic pass is going to make me feel good.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a great assist is always super fun.
Yeah.
I was super curious about you working as a historian with Holocaust survivors, and man, what did you learn from that experience?
That was my first job out when I finished graduate school, way back when I thought I was going to be a history professor. And that was my first job. And it was at a foundation that had Steven Spielberg had started. And it was early in the rise of the commercial internet, right? So early mid 90s to late 90s. And my job was we'd go out and collect Holocaust survivor testimonies from around the world. I think like 100,000 hours, 120,000 hours. The repositories now with USC. And we developed this technology for digitizing the videos, which none of this will seem at all revolutionary to anyone in today's terms. And then we had this keywording strategy. So this was well before there was anything like a Google. It was whatever the browser, the search browsers were at that time, and search directories were at the time. And so my job, with other people, was to have my headphones on, watch and listen to a testimony. We'd kind of break it up into segments and keyword it. And, everyone has a story, right? Everyone has a profound story. We all do. But the resilience that people have is phenomenal. And some people came out of that experience different than others. Some carried it for the rest of their lives as a trauma. Others had it as a trauma, but had converted it into lessons for how they were going to raise their family and walk through life. And it's been such a long time. Like, it's hard for me to pick out any one story. I would say for anyone who's interested in this content area, read Viktor Frankl. Man's Search for Meaning is probably one of the best books on this. Anything from Elie Wiesel is pretty phenomenal. You'll come away with your own conclusions, right? Come away with, just read the experience, and we connect to people on a completely different level. But I think part of this, for me, from a skill set, because of the nature of the job and the methodology of the job, I really honed how I listen to people and how I hear people and hear what they're saying. But even, I think more importantly, hear what they're not saying, what they're avoiding saying. I think probably to the frustration of people that I work with. They're like, wait a minute, where did you pick up on that? But it was one of those that listening muscle that I really developed early on. I mean, I think some of that went further back to maybe my childhood and what I was listening for, but it was definitely sharpened in that space, in that context. And it was the most unique job I'll ever have, for sure.
Yeah, I actually write about Viktor Frankl in my upcoming book. And, I read Man's Search for Meaning many years ago, and it, of course, just had such a profound impact on me. And as I was researching more about him, as I used him as part of A Path to Good Moods, I discovered that his mother, his father, his brother, and his wife were all sent to these concentration camps, and all of them died.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was able to survive because he had a greater meaning. He thought that he would come out of this and teach the world about positive psychology, and so holding on to this purpose and holding on to his values, that was really important to him through this whole thing. But man, just the worst, just completely unfair. I,
Oh,
I, I couldn't even imagine every freedom, every liberty, all the people that I love the most in my life taken from me for no reason at all and killed.
guilt.
And me suffering with all of my friends for no reason, like just the injustice of it would have just been maddening. And that was the most famous quote in his book, which is, they cannot take the control of your mind, your attitude. That's the one thing that no one has control over. And so that's your final freedom that no one can take from you.
Yeah, I think, I have this, and this, I probably got this from someone else who may have got this from Viktor Frankl, but there's an exercise I have called control circles. And Man's Search for Meaning really exemplifies this, and he maybe got this from some element of Buddhism or whatever. It doesn't really matter the label, right? But control circles are sort of these three circles. One's super small, and I'm in the super small one. Then there's one, they're concentric circles. There's one outside of it, and then there's one outside of that, and everything beyond that. And, the only thing that I control, the only thing any of us controls, is that really small circle in the middle, and it's really, really small. And I imagine, what I often imagine, certainly when I was struggling in sobriety, and I've gone through this a couple of times, but is that I make that control circle really, really small, in spite of my desire to make it really big and grasp as much, that I put as much in that circle as I possibly can. I make it really, really small, and the smaller I make it, I realize that how little control I actually have over the world, and the only thing I really control is my response to conditions in the world. There may be some things that I influence, and those are in the next circle, and there are very few things that I really actually control. And one of our great, and I have a lot of people that I work with do that, right? I've always like, go through this, when what they're trying to exercise is having maximal control on things, people, places, and things around them. It's like, make it really small, and they hate it. But at the end, it's like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, I control very little, which, by the way, isn't me creating an excuse for apathy. That's not it at all. It would be very easy to confuse that, but it's more of how do I take absolute control and responsibility for where I am? And I think, bringing it back to Man's Search for Meaning, you talk about the freedoms and liberties and things like that being taken away. But I think it's even on a more granular level, like basically being taken to a very primal animal state where you have other people are telling you when you can use go to the bathroom. Other people are controlling what food you're going to eat. I mean, this is way, way more brutal than even freedoms and liberties being taken away. This is control of our body, right? And forcing people into an invisible system in which and in which most people are designed to perish, right? It's designed. And I look at I read what Viktor Frankl has to say, and part of, I think, his survival was, this is how I'm going to. I have a very small hula hoop that I'm in at this moment. It's super small, and so how do I protect my humanity and my autonomy? And people can control my body, but my autonomy and agency, you can't control that. And I think that's, for me, how I read that.
Yeah, I love that. This exercise on control circles. Of course, we want to believe we can control everything. We want to believe we're in control of everything. And big life events often show us that we really weren't in control, that all of that thought that I'm controlling things was just an illusion.
Let's go back to the mountain, but let's go back to the Leadville story.
Yeah.
That rider is sitting in their medical tent, and one of their legs is absolutely delivering no power. Right? You can actually, on a bike, you can measure power. Everyone's got a power meter these days, and you can actually measure your power. And not only is he, psychologically feeling it, but physically he's not. And so what does he get to control in that moment? He gets to control, am I gonna throw in the towel? and deny myself the rest of this experience, or am I gonna just use what I've got and work with what I can and go forward. And if I can't make, if I've tried to go forward and I can't make it, so be it. But can I get a few more miles out of this? Let's try and see. Let's try and see. Let's see what happens. And I think, you take that to alcoholism, and it becomes a 1 day, 1 hour, or any kind of recovery, or injury recovery or emotional recovery. It's 1 day, 1 hour, 1 pedal stroke, 1 step at a time, right? That's control what you can control. If it's like, can I take 1 more step? Great. How do I feel? Great. Let's take the next step.
Yeah, I've talked about it on this show. Our business got into financial trouble this year with the interest rates going up.
Yeah.
I wasn't in control of interest rates, but this is it was an exercise for me in this control circles thing, because I thought I was in control of my business. I have all these financial metrics. I've got all these performance metrics. I got leading indicators, lagging indicators. All those things made me feel very in control. And then the government flipped a dial and raised interest rates. And all of a sudden, everything didn't work. The financial metrics didn't work. The leading indicators didn't work. The lagging indicators didn't work. We were losing tens of thousands of dollars a month. In 6 months, I lost over $300,000. And, I had to make my circle super small and say, because I was starting to feel like, completely defeated. Like I can't do this. Like my leg's not working. The terrain's too tough. There's too many miles to go. I need to quit. I have to throw in the towel. And I said, well, what can I do? And I had help. I have a performance coach named Steve Gill. And Steve said, Matt, you have more options than you think. There's always choices. There's always options. Even when it looks dark, there's always options. And so I said, okay, well, what are my options? So I went home after this coaching session with him and I just wrote like what my options were on it, just like you were saying with this over next on a piece of paper. What are the options? And I said, well, one thing I can control is how much I spend. So I can't control how much we're selling because the market's down 35%, but I can spend less. And so I made a plan to spend less. Another thing I can control is how many calls my team will make. So I started to show up every single day early and just talk to people and say, hey, let's make phone calls today, because we can control that effort piece. And just kind of 1 day at a time. Same thing as what you were saying, just 1 day at a time.
All at a time.
And then we had a profitable month. And then we had another profitable month. And we're now sitting at our 3rd profitable month in a row, but it's still just 1 day at a time. This morning I showed up early, we made calls again. Today we had a marketing meeting. What's that?
In that $300,000, was it actual money that was in the bank, or was it projected revenue?
No, cash out of my bank account.
So, yeah.
Like just draining accounts to the point where we thought we were going to lose our house.
Oof.
And we've got 4 kids. So all the survival stuff, the fear stuff starts to show up, and it tests you.
It does.
That survival, like when you really feel like your back's against the wall, you get tested.
And when it comes to money and finances, I mean, that's one of the basic needs, right? Like, what do I need to feel secure? And money is obviously a huge one. I mean, a lot of what I talk about I think a lot of what a lot of coaches these days talk about can be a little esoteric, right? We can be a little new agey, and when it comes down to it, people need jobs and people need financial security, and that is a fundamental part of being who we are in the place where we are and in this time. And so, yeah, I think what you did was a great way of navigating that space and looking at, like, what do I really need? And how much of this do I want versus how much of it is it that I really need, right? And a lot of times we often get confused between what our wants and needs are. Well, yeah, I want like, $1 million a year, but what do I really need?
Right. No, absolutely. And what's great is that, one of my buddies shared a quote with me when I was going through this. And it's actually Eric Cabral who produces this podcast. And I reached out to Eric and I said, Eric, man, I'm going through this tough time. I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford to continue the Good Mood Show while we're going through this. And Eric gave us a financial break and said, hey, man, what you're doing is really important. I want to help you through it. But he sent me this quote, and it was, great times make weak leaders. And then weak leaders make hard times.
Right.
And hard times make strong leaders, and strong leaders make great times. And I just loved it. And I leaned in and I said, okay, I'm going through a really hard time. I didn't think it was my weakness that had created it, but it doesn't matter. It was outside of my circle of control. And I said, but what it's going to do is it's going to strengthen me.
And how has it strengthened you? Or how is it, and let's try it another way. Let me, in the context of who are we becoming? How is it strengthening you?
Yeah, it is. It is. I took so many things for granted. Like financial security, I took for granted. And the appreciation for a month where we didn't lose money, the appreciation for the peace that brings to my life, right? The appreciation for those dollars that I just didn't have. I didn't have before because, for over a decade, it was just, we made money every single month. It was, it wasn't even, I couldn't really relate to what that financial struggle would feel like.
Yeah, you're in an interesting business. I've talked to a friend of mine who's a mortgage broker as well. He's like, it's killing us. It's just killing the industry right now. So I get it. We also had 10 years with no interest. So
right.
At some point that party was going to end, and it's unfortunate when it does. It really is. I get it. Yeah. But I think what you are proving is that we learn how to navigate, right? And we get shocked by the hard moment. We get shocked by the hard moment, and we get shocked when the status quo gets disrupted. And yet here you are. And thank you, Eric. Thank you for supporting the podcast. It's an honor to be here. But I think that the other thing that you're proving to me is one of the things that for me, it was always hard to say, and I think this is true for a lot of men, was I didn't know how to say, please help me, or I need help. And then at one point when my life was in such a state where I needed to say, please help me, I realized after saying I love you, those are the next 3 most powerful words you can say in any language. And you, in a manner of speaking, said it to Eric and said, I don't know if I can keep going. And that's just that was another way of saying, I need help. And what we learn is that the right person is there and will recognize what's going on. I think, you talk about your faith. I mean, for me, I call myself an atheist who prays. And part of my faith is knowing that things are going to work out how they're supposed to work out. And as long as I do the work of staying in acceptance and staying in that process of surrender, we'll probably figure it out. It may suck, it may be a little painful, but there are people out there who are great, who can guide, who know way better than I do. And now I have a new tool. I can say, please help me. And I can use that tool if I'm, in acceptance and surrender.
Wow. Yeah, I agree with you. Things are going to work out the way they're supposed to work out.
The problem is that they don't work out on our timeline, and they don't work out the way our egos tell us they have to work out.
Yeah, then we're struggling, right? But one of my favorite thought processes is to go back to other challenging moments in my past that at the time just felt devastating. And given this long view of time since that moment, look back and say, how did that help me?
How did that help me?
Well, if all of the challenging moments in my past have helped me in some way, and I wouldn't be the person I am today without them, I wouldn't take them back. I mean, some of them sucked. I don't want to go through them again, but I wouldn't take back the lessons I learned from them. Well, then this next challenging moment I'm about to go through that I'm going to hate going through, at some point in my future, I will be able to look back on this moment and say, I was helped by that in some way.
I was helping. Yeah, I mean, there's that thing of confirmation bias where we get into the moment of believing like everything as it is right now is exactly how it's going to be forever.
It never will be. Everything changes, man.
No
Everything.
matter how great it is or how crummy it is, it's going to be just like that forever.
Yeah, no, it is hard to get out of that. Like, oh man, sometimes we think the bad times are going to last forever, but they're not. And then of course we always want the good times to last forever, but they don't either.
Is there a moment in some of those hard times that felt devastating that maybe unlocked you stepping up to do this show?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The Good Mood Show would not be here if I didn't have suffering that I couldn't understand.
Right.
So those hard times created this desire to figure out how the heck can I find joy and peace and happiness and light through hard times, because I don't want to suffer like I've suffered. So yeah, what a gift. And I wouldn't be writing the book. I wouldn't have the show. I wouldn't have a conversation with somebody as amazing as you today, Bryan, if it hadn't have been for all those hard times. And also we get that kind of gift of being able to walk somebody else through the hard time that we ourselves have walked through. I'm sure you've seen that with people struggling with alcohol, that you walk that path, you know how hard it is. And you also know that there's a better way that you could help with and just be there.
I think we see it with people. A friend of mine was just hit by a car on a bike ride, and it's basically their livelihood, right? They do this professionally.
Mm.
I'm at this point, I'm a dabbler. They do it professionally, and it's part of so much of their identity. And to watch them have to walk through the recovery of that. I think anyone going through any kind of recovery, if we can be there as a part of that and give our experience of what it was like, and what's happened and what it's like now. There's a lot of ways we can be of service, and there are a lot of ways that I imagine you're being of service with this show using the tip of the iceberg metaphor for people you don't even know, right? That you may be offering up a bit of your experience, not even in the form of advice, just sharing of your experience. There's someone out there who's going to go, oh God, really? Matt suffered? Oh, I'm not alone. And just knowing you're not alone, gosh, that's beyond empowering.
That was one of the biggest things I learned. I'm so glad you said that. We always think our suffering is unique to us. I'm the only one going through this right now. No one understands what it's like to feel this way. Yeah, just knowing that, well, every single person has felt that way at some point. And if not yet, they will at some point. Can be a little bit of a relief to say, all right, well, this is a shared human experience, this thing called suffering.
I think the trick in what you're saying, I run a men's group. Like, I don't just coach men, but I do run a men's group, and we meet 2 times a month, and we just met this morning. And I think in what you're talking about, the trick is to recognize the commonality of the experience, but then keep ourselves from comparing. It's so easy for us to say, oh, well, this is going on in my life, but Matt, now that guy's really suffering. And then then the next logical extension of that when we do that is to say, so then do I really deserve to feel suffering? And then we say, no. It's like, no, stop, just recognize the shared experience, accept how you feel. And then that's an over and next moment, right? The over is comparing, next, just feeling it and moving on.
Yeah. I don't ever want to take away from my own, like sometimes I'm in real agony, and it's compared to somebody who's just lost both hands and both feet. like Wendy Wallace, who was on the show. She lost both her hands and both her feet to a flesh-eating bacteria
Wow.
at the same time. You know, and like, I'm like, man, well, I guess my problem really isn't that big of a deal in comparison. But then I'm like negating myself
You're
from,
negating.
no, I'm actually in agony right now. Like, this thing is really bothering me, and this is my path to walk right now. And no, I'm not walking Wendy's path, and I could certainly have compassion for her, but I need to also have self-compassion here, that I'm really hurting.
And I think that that's the journey of self-acceptance, right? Is that when we can stop comparing and accept that we actually are hurting and we feel these things, and then just stop right there, and don't start saying, well, you know, but do I deserve to feel this? Like, why even ask that question? It doesn't matter. It's part of the human condition. And I think that that's really part of that journey to self-acceptance, because you just said, I'm negating myself, right? When we start to ask that.
Yeah. Bryan, I could talk with you all day. Man, you are such a wise individual. I'm sure there's people listening to the show that are going to want to reach out to you, learn more, perhaps start to work with you. How would somebody reach out to you?
First of all, please do reach out. I love conversations. You know, I think Matt's just, they're getting that large cane from stage left and pulling me off with the hook. Yeah, please do. I'm at locomotivecoaching.com, and there's no E in locomotive. It's LOCOMOTIV, or Bryan Yates, Bryan with a Y. So you can find me on the website. I do a free session, which is, you know, we go deep. We go deep because I want to hear your story, and I want to hear what's going on. I want to hear what brings you in, and let's go. The other way is I do a lot of my primary writing on LinkedIn. So connect with me there. I'm happy to do that, and love to hear what's going on in people's lives, and more importantly, sort of what's going on between your ears, and how can we move that stuff through your body and start getting some momentum.
Bryan, I really appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me on.